You're not here by chance tonight. Something within you knows that silence sometimes speaks louder than 1,000 words, and that disappearing can be the most powerful act of self-love you've ever practiced. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his nightly meditations that true strength lies not in retaliation, but in transcendence. And tonight, while they still wonder where you went, you'll discover why the Stoics considered strategic withdrawal not as weakness, but as the highest form of wisdom. Those who hurt you are still searching for answers in the void you left behind, but you're here, ready to understand the transformative power of your silence and how the ancient philosophers used this same strategy to protect their inner peace from external storms. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from what part of the world you're watching, relax and get comfortable. Let's begin. Have you ever wondered if walking away from chaos could actually be your smartest move rather than a sign of giving up? Think about those times when you felt trapped in endless arguments, exhausting situations, or just plain negativity. Did you ever feel like fighting back only made things worse? This idea goes back a long way, and it might surprise you to know that some of history's greatest thinkers believed the real secret to strength wasn't in confrontation, but in stepping back. Today, let's get into why the ancient Stoics saw strategic withdrawal, basically choosing silence and walking away, not as weakness, but as real wisdom. The ancient Stoics lived hundreds of years ago, but what they figured out about life still matters. They paid a lot of attention to those messy, emotional moments where things can quickly spiral out of control. Folks like Marcus Aurelius, who was a Roman emperor, and Epictetus, who started out as a slave and became a famous teacher, believed that what mattered most wasn't controlling the world or the people around you, but learning to control yourself. They taught that your reactions are the one thing you can always own, even when everything else feels up for grabs. In disagreements or in the middle of drama, it's really tempting to want the last word, to set things straight, or even just to make sure people know you're right. But what the Stoics pointed out is that this urge can actually drag you down. They saw it as a huge waste to spend your precious time and energy fighting with people who don't value it or who want to pull you into cycles of negativity. For them, true strength wasn't about beating someone else or being right in an argument. It was about stepping away from all that noise so you could keep your own mind and values clear. Strategic withdrawal doesn't mean you're running away or avoiding your problems. That's a pretty common misunderstanding. Instead, it's all about choosing which battles are worth fighting and which just drain you for no good reason. Picture this. You're in a situation where things are going nowhere and things are getting more toxic by the minute. Instead of staying and getting caught up in this mess, the Stoics would say, step away. Your energy and your peace of mind are too important to throw away on arguments that won't help or people who don't actually want solutions. Now, here's where the idea gets interesting. Choosing to stay silent, really choosing, not because you're too scared to speak, but because you value your own well-being, is a power move in Stoic thinking. Silence to the Stoics doesn't mean you have nothing to say. It means you've decided that preserving your own virtue or your sense of what's right and whole inside you matters more than being dragged into pointless conflict. So you're not ignoring what's happening, you're just not letting it run your life. The Stoics were huge on this idea of virtue. For them, it was kind of like your personal integrity or your true self. When you get into repeated arguments, especially about things that don't really matter, you end up compromising that core. It eats away at your calm and pulls you down into negativity. But by walking away, by refusing to spend your soul on things or people who don't deserve it, you actually become stronger. You keep your own values untouched by all that drama. Maybe the best way to really get what the Stoics meant is to think about energy, not just in the New Age sense, but in a practical way. Every time you say yes to a fight, a pointless conversation, a circular argument, You are saying no to your own peace. And for the Stoics, wasting your energy on people or circumstances that don't matter or that actively harm you is just not smart. It's the opposite of wisdom. Strategic withdrawal allows you to redirect that energy into something that actually makes your life better. Of course, not every conflict is meaningless, and not every situation can just be walked away from. The Stoics knew that too. But their main point was about discernment. Knowing when staying in the fight just keeps you stuck. They wanted people to learn how to recognize when a situation wasn't worth their soul, so they could leave behind what didn't serve them. The self-mastery that comes from stepping away means you get to choose your battles instead of being dragged into everyone that comes along. If you read the writings of Marcus Aurelius, he actually talks about these kinds of moments. He reminds himself, and the people he governed, that it's completely normal to face insults, disagreements, even betrayal. What matters is how you answer those things, not what actually happened. By being able to leave a situation without bitterness, without needing to get that last word, you stay true to your values. Walking away becomes an act of respect for yourself. There's also something very freeing about realizing you don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. When someone tries to provoke you or pull you into their drama, you can actually just opt out. That's what the Stoics called being indifferent to things that don't align with your values. It doesn't mean you're cold or uncaring. It just means you refuse to let someone else control your mood or decisions. Now, you might wonder if there's any risk that you'll look weak or like you're avoiding responsibility. The thing is, the Stoics didn't care much about how things looked. They cared about what was real. For them, real strength was about inner steadiness, not outer performance. They saw people who get loud, defensive, or obsessed with revenge as being held hostage by their emotions. But when you can quietly walk away, keep your cool, and just focus on your own path, that's what they called true courage. Another big thing in Stoic thinking is the idea that your life is too short for pettiness. If you use your days getting tangled in other people's messes, you're missing out on what actually makes life valuable. This idea can sound harsh, but it's more about protecting your inner world. They believed that if something or someone repeatedly takes from your happiness or drags out your worst qualities, it's wise, not weak, to set that aside. You're not doing it to punish anyone else. You're simply prioritizing your own well-being. Stepping away is basically reclaiming agency, which just means taking back the sense that you're in charge of your own actions. When you stay in a toxic pattern, you're often reacting, not deciding. Reacting is automatic, but deciding is conscious. The moment you realize you can withdraw, you remember you have a choice. You can choose silence, choose letting go, and in the process, choose yourself. Also, think about how tiring it is to always be on edge, ready for the next conflict. The Stoics were brutally honest about this. They said it isn't worth getting spun up every time something or someone goes sideways. If you always let frustration or anger yank you around, you wear yourself out. What's the point? Culturally, these lessons have stuck around for a reason. People don't remember you for every argument you won or every comeback you delivered. More often, they remember if you were calm, resilient, and surprisingly unbothered. If you could exit a situation with your dignity intact. There's a famous passage where Epictetus tells his students that most things people say or do are out of their own confusion. So getting trapped in their confusion by trying to prove a point or win an argument is pointless. The wiser move, he taught, was to keep your head clear, and if that means leaving or going silent, so be it. That way, you save your attention for what you can control, like your own actions and attitude. The modern world has changed a lot in how we communicate, but these lessons are probably more needed than ever. With all the noise, all the different platforms for disagreement and back and forth, it's easy to forget that not every conflict deserves an audience or a reply. Applying a Stoic lens to your daily life means remembering that you can stay present for yourself, instead of just reacting on autopilot to everything around you. It's about mindful action, even if that action is simply leaving. So, what does it look like in real life to use strategic withdrawal? It could be not responding to a text or comment that is clearly meant to provoke you. It could mean ending a relationship or stepping back from a friendship that only brings drama or pain. Sometimes it means leaving a job, a group, or even a family dynamic that is just too costly for your mental peace. In every one of these cases, the decision to withdraw is rooted in a clear sense of what you will and will not allow to shape your life. You might notice after withdrawing that your sense of self-respect builds up. The Stoics called this preserving your virtue. When you leave a negative situation without making a scene, when you can let things be rather than always needing to have the final say, you end up feeling more stable. It's like a quiet confidence grows, because you know you can face tough situations without falling apart or resorting to revenge. Looking at this honestly, there's nothing easy about walking away. Sometimes there's pressure to stay, to hash it out, or at least to explain yourself. But the Stoics would ask, who are you really answering to? Is it the other person, or is it your own conscience? At the end of the day, their advice was to live in a way that keeps your mind and morals steady, not caught up in winning arguments or proving points. They really believed that the best revenge for being wronged, in the sense of balancing things out, was just refusing to let it affect your life any more than necessary. People often say, don't let them get to you. But the Stoics took this seriously. They thought you could train yourself to get better at this over time, just like getting better at any skill. Little by little, you'd get faster at recognizing when something isn't worth your energy. With practice, it had become second nature to walk away, and it would feel less like losing and more like protecting yourself. There's also an element of focus here. The more you choose to disengage from drama, the more time and bandwidth you have for things that truly matter. If your head's not full of anger or anxiety from constant drama, you notice you can actually start focusing on things that make your life richer: hobbies, better relationships, personal growth. And that's pretty much what the Stoics hoped everyone would do. Lastly, this approach isn't about being cold or disconnected. The Stoics didn't want people to cut themselves off from caring. Instead, they were big on compassion, for both yourself and for others. Sometimes that compassion looks like recognizing that you and someone else just can't meet in the middle. And rather than fight, you choose not to let bitterness or resentment take over. You respect both yourself and the other person by not making things worse. So, if you ever find yourself worrying that stepping back or going silent is a sign of weakness, it might be worth remembering how long people have valued inner strength. The ancient Stoics saw enormous wisdom in protecting your energy and prioritizing peace over pointless fights. True resilience, in their eyes, comes from self-mastery, the quiet decision to walk away when a situation does not serve your well-being. It's not escape, but a declaration. Your mind and heart are too valuable to waste on cycles that go nowhere. That dignity, that clarity, is the kind of quiet revenge that doesn't just spare you pain. It shapes the kind of life you actually want to live. Sometimes the real shift happens not during heated arguments, but in the quiet that follows your decision to just disappear from the noise. You don't say anything dramatic, there's no official announcement. You just quietly step back and let silence do the talking. That's because silence is not just an empty space. It means something, and people notice even if they don't say it directly. If you think about it, a lot of what actually gets remembered after a messy situation isn't the words that were shouted, but the moment when someone simply detached and left a void. When you choose to go silent and walk away, the first thing people around you usually notice is that change in the usual flow of interaction. Like, there was this expectation that you would react a certain way, maybe defend yourself or try to fix things, and suddenly you just stop. That silence, that disappearance, It does not just go unnoticed. It's actually pretty powerful because it forces the other person, or even a whole group, to face the sudden change without a script. You're no longer playing the role they expected, and now they have to sit with whatever's left hanging in the air. People have a basic instinct to fill in gaps in conversations and situations. When you withdraw, those left behind are pulled into this uncomfortable space where they have to ask themselves, what happened? Or why did it end this way? Often, they search for answers, and that search is usually more revealing, and sometimes even more painful, than anything you could have said in another round of back and forth. Your absence becomes a question mark sitting on their minds, a reminder that something didn't resolve as they were expecting, and now they have no control over your response or your presence. Silence can be unsettling for a reason. In daily life, we're used to filling gaps with explanations or reassurances, but disappearing takes away those typical patterns. People have to wonder, was it them? Was it you? Was it the situation? Most of the time, silence forces a kind of honest review that just isn't triggered by arguing or defending. If you've ever been on the receiving end of someone's silent withdrawal, you already know how it gets into your head. Maybe you replay moments, try to figure out where things shifted, and even make up possible reasons in your mind because nothing was spelled out neatly for closure. What happens next is interesting. The person or people on the other side are often left with their own words or actions echoing back at them. When you don't return fire or defend yourself or give them new material to work with, they end up facing the impact of their behavior alone. That can be a lot more confronting than any well-spoken speech or dramatic exit, just because silence doesn't let the conversation move forward. People have no script to follow, no comeback. They just have to live with the questions that now won't get answered. This way, your absence basically becomes like a mirror. It reflects everything back to them, whether good or bad. Maybe they'll start to feel the weight of something they did, or maybe they'll rethink what kind of relationship or dynamic they actually want to have. No matter what, you're not feeding into the old cycle anymore. That silence lets things settle. People have to reflect on their own, and sometimes that's exactly what's needed for growth or change. It gives space for real self-examination because there's nothing left for them to argue against or justify. It's important to point out that using silence isn't about being manipulative or playing games with people's emotions. Instead, it's about stepping back when talking more won't actually help, or when you realize the healthiest thing you can do is just not participate in further conflict. Your silence shows respect for your own boundaries and signals that you're not interested in escalating things. It's not cold, it's just a clear signal that you're done with participating in ways that no longer feel right to you. Also, when you step away without a dramatic scene, people sometimes expect you to come running back or at least try to reopen the discussion. But when you hold steady and keep your distance, it surprises them every single time. Over time, even those who usually thrive on conflict start to respect that boundary, even if they don't admit it out loud. Some may even reach their own conclusions and quietly start acting differently, whether it means trying to fix things or just backing off out of respect for your choice. It's fascinating how silence can linger much longer than spoken words. Words can be forgotten, especially in the heat of the moment or at the peak of an argument. But when someone disappears from your life or pulls away from a stressful dynamic, there's a space where their energy, their input, used to be. That emptiness is hard to ignore. It prompts curiosity, sometimes regret, sometimes confusion, and occasionally even growth. People can find themselves wondering not just what they did, but why the situation was allowed to get that far. They start re-examining their actions, maybe questioning their motives, perhaps trying to see things from your point of view for the first time. Think about how group dynamics work in workplaces or social circles. When the person who usually keeps the peace or absorbs the stress steps away, the rest of the group suddenly has to adjust. There's no one left picking up the slack or smoothing things over, and this new silence makes everyone a little more aware of the mess that's left. Sometimes, Only after someone has removed themselves does the real issue become visible. That absence is often the wake-up call because suddenly there's no more distraction or noise, just the fact that something essential is missing. Something else to consider is that people remember not just what you said, but much more often, how you made them feel by your actions. Silence is one of the strongest actions you can take because it can't be argued with or misquoted. It's just there, an undeniable sign that something was important enough for you to quietly step away. That tends to be much more memorable than shouting accusations or drawn-out debates. Absence, especially when combined with calm and dignity, stands out in a way that noisy exits never really do. Since silence avoids fueling ongoing arguments, it also reduces the chance of escalating things into bigger drama. When you don't respond, there's nothing left to keep the conflict burning. This lack of fuel is what truly gives silence its strength. Eventually, even the most stubborn situations can lose momentum, and everyone involved is left with nothing but their own thoughts. It's not about punishing anyone. It's just a way of reminding everyone that you've chosen peace over chaos. With time, even those who were the most combative might begin to miss the stability you brought, or realize they have to handle things themselves in your absence. It's also worth mentioning that silence communicates boundaries in a way that words sometimes fail to. When you no longer respond, when your side of the dialogue is just empty space, it says very clearly, "That's enough." People might resist at first, but over time they come to understand that you aren't looking for more of the same. You're drawing a line for good reason. This kind of boundary setting never needs explanations or defenses. It stands on its own and teaches people how you expect to be treated in the future. Another part of the power of silence is the fact that it changes the balance of control. In conversations or conflicts, as long as you're engaging, the other person knows how to push your buttons or keep you off balance with new accusations or shifting the story. When you simply disappear, all of that control falls away. Silence doesn't play by anyone else's rules. You're not trapped in a pattern anymore. Instead, you hand the entire conversation or the entire relationship back to the other person, and they have to figure out what to do with it. Sometimes that means they step up and try to be better, or maybe they realize what they lost. But all of that only happens once you're no longer participating in their pattern. Of course, not every situation calls for withdrawing completely. Sometimes people just need space to cool off or time to reflect before things can be patched up. But even in those cases, silence works its own kind of magic because it allows real feelings to surface, not just the ones shared in the heat of the moment, but the quieter, more honest reactions that come after. When there's no more back and forth, people get the room to actually miss each other or to really feel the weight of what's been lost. Over time, your silence does a lot more than you might think. People who were sure you'd never walk away now have to reconsider their whole idea of you. They may start to see you with more respect, or at the very least a kind of reluctant admiration. Even those who never come out and say it are likely to be influenced by the reality that you're not willing to return to a bad dynamic just because it's familiar. That lesson sticks with people, even if it takes them a while to fully accept it. There's also an interesting side effect of choosing silence in place of confrontation. You end up giving both yourself and others time to process. Without constant communication, people break out of old patterns and start seeing things in a new light. Some may realize what they've taken for granted, or maybe they develop a bit more empathy for your position. Silence disrupts the usual script. It puts everyone in a place where they're forced to figure out what happens next, because you're no longer making the usual moves. One thing to remember is that not everybody reacts the same way to silence. Some people will get defensive or try to pull you back into old conversations. Others might respond by giving you even more space, perhaps assuming you're gone for good. But most people, especially when given enough time, move past the initial frustration and start reflecting on their own role in how things ended up. This is where silence really shows its value, because it allows for genuine reflection in a way that arguing never does. The impact of silence doesn't fade quickly either. Days, weeks, or even months later, people still remember the person who just stopped playing the old game. Silence sticks because it's an unmistakable signal that your energy and attention are no longer up for grabs. It's one of those rare messages that doesn't need repeating. Instead of prolonging negative cycles, you break them for good. People eventually see that this isn't about avoiding discomfort. It's about refusing to accept patterns that never worked in the first place. Closing the door with silence doesn't create hard feelings the way dramatic confrontations can. You don't leave behind a trail of new wounds, just an open space where people can think for themselves. That leaves a different impression on everyone involved. They no longer have easy defenses. They have to consider why things ended quietly and whether their own actions played a role. It's a longer process, but more often than not, it leads to more real understanding in the end. Even outside of personal relationships, silence can be a powerful message in other areas of life too. Maybe it's a job that refused to show basic respect, or a group that would never listen to your input. When you walk away without a fuss, it forces those around you to look at what kind of environment they really created. Sometimes only absence can show people what was missing. The void you leave behind can become a turning point for them and for you. If you're ever unsure about whether silence really matters, all you need to do is think back on moments from your own life when someone you cared about stopped responding. That feeling stays with you because it's different from other endings. The words left unsaid actually make people listen more closely. There's an invitation, whether they accept it or not, to sort through the pieces and figure out what really matters. In some cases, silence can even be the first step toward genuine change, because it puts responsibility where it belongs, on those left behind to consider and, hopefully, to grow. That's why, for many people, choosing silence is not only about protecting themselves, but about inviting others to face the truth. Instead of fighting every battle, you step back and let the truth become visible on its own. Your silence is not an accusation, but a statement that you value your energy enough not to waste it where it's not respected. It's a decision to focus on better things, leaving behind a space that often speaks louder than anything you could have said. Whether silence becomes a permanent change or just a temporary break, the effect is lasting. It tells people what words sometimes can't, that you're not waiting for their validation, that you trust your own path, and that real communication sometimes means knowing when to say nothing at all. The memory of that absence and the changes it brings tend to stay with everyone involved long after the noise is gone. Choosing silence over conflict really shifts the balance of energy in your life, especially when you recognize how powerful it can be to reclaim your peace. But it's not just about sending a message to other people or making them reflect on their own actions. There's a whole other side of this experience that's deeply personal. It's about disciplining yourself to protect your own well-being, even when the world around you might be pushing you in all sorts of uncomfortable directions. That's where the concept of self-love through disengagement comes in. It goes way beyond repeating positive phrases in the mirror or focusing on self-care routines. Sometimes taking care of yourself is about making tough decisions, the kind that draw a line in the sand between what you will accept and what you won't. A lot of people today talk about boundaries, but don't always realize that putting them into practice often means walking away from situations or even people that consistently do you harm. Self-love in this sense is practical, not performative. It's about noticing where you're losing hours, days, or even months of mental peace just by trying to fix what can't be fixed or absorbing negativity that doesn't belong to you in the first place. When you finally choose to disengage, there might be this brief moment of guilt or doubt, especially if you've been taught to always put others first, to keep trying, or to never give up on relationships and responsibilities. But eventually, as that space grows, you notice you can breathe easier. Your mind calms down. There's this realization that you don't have to be constantly on edge, waiting for the next conflict, or absorbing every problem around you. Sometimes disappearing from a toxic dynamic feels like losing something. Maybe a connection, maybe a sense of purpose, or even the familiar patterns, however negative they may have been. But as you settle into your own space, your focus naturally shifts from "what did I lose by leaving?" to "what have I regained?" The most profound thing people often rediscover is themselves. Without the drama, pressure, or constant hum of negativity, you suddenly have time and energy to notice your own needs and to make small decisions that benefit you. Maybe you start sleeping better. Maybe your appetite comes back, or your creativity sparks for the first time in ages. These are not dramatic changes, but they quietly rebuild your foundation. When you talk about self-preservation, it's not about having a fortress mentality or cutting yourself off emotionally from everyone. It basically means valuing your well-being enough to stop fighting a losing battle and redirecting that same energy somewhere it can actually heal and nourish you. This process is different for everyone. Some people notice they laugh more or have the energy to pick up old hobbies again. Others feel less anxious, as if a weight they were carrying for so long finally lifts. These changes don't happen overnight. They happen in small, almost invisible steps. Some days are harder than others. It's normal to feel a bit strange when you start paying attention to yourself, especially if you're used to pleasing others and putting their comfort before your own. When you begin to disengage from people, spaces, or routines that repeatedly drain you, you start seeing just how much unnecessary stress you were carrying. In the thick of conflict, you might not even realize how exhausting it is, physically and emotionally, until you step away. The headaches become less frequent. The tension in your shoulders eases, and weirdly enough, you find yourself actually wanting to make plans again. Plans that are for you, not just to keep someone else happy or to avoid more arguments. This is the reality of protecting your inner sanctuary. It's the decision to stop sacrificing your health, joy, and time for situations that will never repay your effort or your love. Something that often gets overlooked in conversations about self-love and boundaries is the difference between bitterness and discernment. Bitterness is when you're stuck in cycles of anger, replaying every hurt and wishing things had gone differently. Discernment is the quiet, steady confidence of knowing that not all spaces are meant for you and that not everyone deserves access to your inner world. Disengagement, when it comes from discernment rather than resentment, doesn't leave you stewing in negativity. Instead, it allows you to let go, not with anger but with relief and clarity. The peace you gain in this process isn't loud or dramatic. It's simply present, allowing you to enjoy the little mundane things in life again without that background noise of stress and conflict. You might notice, too, that once you distance yourself from drama, you start seeing those patterns for what they really are. Maybe you recognize that you always felt responsible for smoothing things over whenever there was conflict, or perhaps you see that you were trying to fix people who didn't want to change. When the external pressure fades, your mind gets a chance to reset its priorities. Suddenly you have space for curiosity, for new interests, for connections that run on genuine energy rather than obligation. You start finding small pieces of yourself that had been buried under old expectations, parts that are easy to overlook until there's finally quiet. Healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about creating enough space for new growth so that the old pain doesn't run the show anymore. Sometimes this means saying no to invitations you know will leave you feeling depleted, or turning down conversations that always spiral in the same negative direction. Some days the choices feel small, like skipping a phone call or spending a quiet evening doing something relaxing instead of joining another stressful gathering. Over time, these decisions pile up, and before you know it, your daily life looks and feels different. There's less drama, less noise. You actually get to hear yourself think. Choosing to disappear from harmful environments isn't only about avoiding pain, it's about planting seeds for a different kind of life, one where you're the primary caretaker of your inner world. In practical terms, this might mean making changes that seem pretty basic on the surface, but add up in a big way over time. For some, it's as simple as spending more time outdoors, revisiting old favorite books, or reconnecting with family members who feel safe and supportive. For others, it may take the form of therapy, exercise, or changing routines like sleep and food habits. There's no single formula, but every small act that honors your own needs is a step towards real self-love. Protecting your well-being also means learning to spot when you're being drawn back into old, unhealthy cycles. Moments will come when you're tempted to re-engage, especially if someone from your past tries to pull you back in with guilt, promises, or even just habit. It's natural to want to see the best in people or give situations another chance. The key is noticing your own reaction. If you feel dread instead of excitement at the thought of reconnecting, that's usually a pretty clear sign your energy is better spent somewhere else. With every time you choose your own peace, your inner sanctuary becomes stronger and more resilient. There will be days when you miss the familiarity of the old environment or relationship, even if it was harmful. Humans have a way of getting used to patterns, no matter how negative they are. In these moments, it helps to remember what your life was like when you were still inside the old dynamic, trying to solve every problem, constantly apologizing, or living in fear of another argument. When you look at it side by side with your life now, it often becomes clear that even though there's a sense of loss, the freedom and clarity you've gained are worth more than the comfort of the known. What's interesting is that once you start living with more care for your own well-being, new kinds of relationships and opportunities begin to show up. When you're not energetically drained from dealing with people or situations that bring out the worst in you, you suddenly have more patience and curiosity for people who bring light and inspiration into your life. You notice red flags faster, so you can build connections from a healthier place. Energy that used to be wasted is now invested into your own growth, creative projects, or just genuinely joyful moments with friends or family. Doing the work of protecting your inner sanctuary doesn't shield you from every hardship. Life will keep serving up its share of challenges, misunderstandings, and setbacks. The difference is that now, your threshold for what you'll accept is much clearer. When you know how it feels to have peace, it becomes harder and harder to trade that away for temporary drama or unresolved conflict. Stepping away becomes easier, and you trust yourself to notice when things aren't right before they do as much damage. There's one thing people sometimes miss about disappearing from a toxic dynamic. It's not just losing a relationship or environment, but also getting back time you almost forgot you once had. Time that's now yours to decide how to spend, on rest, on learning, on exploring what brings you real joy or meaning. Nobody gets this time back, so protecting your peace means making every day count, even if it looks simple from the outside. Another part of nurturing your inner sanctuary is giving yourself permission to be okay with solitude. For many, stepping away from conflict means having more time alone, which can feel uncomfortable at first, but later reveals itself to be the richest time of healing and self-discovery. When you're not preoccupied with the moods, needs, or reactions of others, you can finally tune into your own feelings, your hopes, or even old dreams you might have let go of. These quiet moments, reading, walking, cooking, or just sitting and thinking, restore you bit by bit. It won't always feel easy. Some days you'll wonder if you made the right choice, especially if people around you question your motives or try to pull you back in. But real self-love isn't loud or showy. It's the choice to stick with yourself even when it's uncomfortable, knowing that no one else can do that work for you. Over time, the stability and contentment you cultivate for yourself become the unshakable foundation that supports you, no matter who comes or goes from your life. Sometimes, too, self-love through disengagement means learning to forgive yourself for all the times you stayed too long, tried too hard, or gave away energy that wasn't appreciated. Rather than beating yourself up for not leaving sooner, you remind yourself that you did what you could with the resources and knowledge you had at the time. It's okay to grieve for what's gone while also feeling proud of how far you've come. This is how the real work of rebuilding begins, not by scrubbing out the past, but by choosing day by day to invest in something better. Eventually, protecting your well-being becomes second nature. You start making choices almost automatically that preserve your sense of calm and joy. When conflict arises, you're quicker to notice when it's worth engaging and when it's time to step back. You find that your standards for what kind of treatment you'll accept have gone up not because you're bitter, but because you deeply understand your own value. With more time and less drama, you might discover that your anxiety lessens, your focus improves, and you're able to make longer-term plans for your life without that cloud of stress hanging over you. You find that your relationships, the ones you choose to keep, are richer and more rewarding. You give more to the people who matter because you're not constantly in survival mode. The circle of positivity grows, and the drawer of negativity shrinks as you adjust to a different kind of normal. By disengaging from negativity and harmful patterns, you draw a clear line around your inner sanctuary. You send a message to yourself that you are worth protecting, worth nurturing, and worth the patience it takes to build a peaceful life. It's a process, not a destination, and it never looks exactly the same for any two people. This is the kind of self-love that changes how you live every day, not by pretending problems don't exist, but by leaving behind whatever tried to convince you that peace was impossible. Over time, the rewards keep building. Not only does your own life become more stable, but you also draw in better relationships and opportunities that reflect the healthy boundaries you've set. In these ways, disengagement is not about what you leave. It's about everything you finally allow yourself to gain. When you've made the decision to step away and protect your inner peace, there's something that often gets overlooked. What actually happens to those you leave behind? There's a whole set of reactions and shifts that ripple through the people or even groups you walked away from, and it's rarely as simple as out of sight, out of mind. Instead, your absence can stir up a kind of quiet storm, not loud or obvious, but impossible to ignore once it starts. If you take a step back for a moment and think about typical social dynamics, you'll notice most people expect closure, or, at the very least, an explanation when a relationship or situation changes. We're so used to explanations, text messages, last talks, or arguments that get hashed out over and over. Suddenly, when everything stops and you just disappear without drama, the response on the other side is different. The people left behind might not admit it straight away, but there's a real impact that starts to show up. Some feel confused, others might get defensive, but almost everybody ends up thinking about what actually happened. It's surprisingly common for the person or people you walked away from to start replaying things in their minds. They go over past arguments, look for clues, and try to figure out if there was some clear sign they missed. Maybe you didn't say everything out loud at the time. Maybe you tried to patch things up quietly before realizing it wouldn't work. But now, with no messages, no calls, and no open door, the people on the other side are left with questions they can't easily answer. Even if they were the ones contributing most of the tension, now they're sitting alone with that silence and having to pick apart their own actions. There's a kind of discomfort that comes with dealing with a void you didn't expect. If someone's been used to having you in their life, maybe as a confidant, peacekeeper, or even the one who took on all the emotional work, it's not just your words they miss. It's your energy, your presence, the stability you brought. That absence can feel strange and unsettling, especially if they relied on you to keep things moving smoothly. Over time, this can become a kind of mirror they have to look into, showing them just how different things are without you. People often think that disappearing is just about making things easier for yourself. But honestly, the other side of the equation doesn't just reset itself. Even in friendships or relationships where someone seemed distant or uninterested, your silence changes the atmosphere. Sometimes it brings up regret over arguments or lost chances. Other times, it plants seeds of curiosity that might never go away. Questions like, did I go too far? Or, was there something I could have done differently? These are not just idle thoughts. They can trigger real reflection and sometimes even growth, especially if the person left behind takes them seriously. Something that stands out is how often people look for validation or closure when someone leaves quietly. They might reach out, even if it's just with a short question or a random message, trying to get some kind of response that helps them make sense of what happened. When that response never comes, it can feel like an itch they can't quite scratch. In some cases, people even start projecting their own answers onto your silence, sometimes blaming themselves, sometimes casting you in a certain light, but always wondering at least a little bit what the reality really was. The absence also creates a kind of space for self-inquiry. People realize they can't control your reaction or rewrite the ending. The silence you leave behind means they have to deal with their own thoughts and feelings without your input or reassurance. That's often where growth starts. Even if it's slow, without the back and forth, there are no more distractions or distractions in blame shifting. People might not admit it out loud, but deep down, the experience of being left with unanswered questions can change how they think about themselves and future relationships. Some people deal with this kind of void by getting angry or defensive, lashing out, or trying to minimize your importance. That's a way of avoiding discomfort, and while it can be loud at first, it usually loses steam when the conversation just isn't happening anymore. Over time, defensiveness tends to fade, replaced with a quieter kind of self-reflection, especially as real life moves forward and the space remains. The fact that you never came back or tried to restart the old pattern says something all by itself. The psychological weight of this absence isn't restricted to individuals. It also plays out in groups, like families, friend circles, or workplaces, where your withdrawal leaves a space that others can't help but notice. Maybe someone else tries to fill your old role, or maybe relationships between others become strained because you were the one keeping the peace. In work situations, the absence of the person who always volunteered or kept things calm might reveal cracks that were previously hidden. It's a collective moment of realization that things were held together by the very person they didn't expect to step away. Sometimes those left behind will try to recreate what's missing by reaching out to others, shifting group dynamics, making promises of change, or even giving you more respect in retrospect. Silence often creates a kind of legend. The story about why you left takes on a life of its own. People might romanticize your absence, downplay the problems that led you to leave, or go to great lengths to attract your attention again. But since the conversation has ended on your side, all they're really left with is the chance to change their own approach if they want a different outcome in the future. Even in situations where tension was sky high, the aftermath of someone quietly withdrawing is almost always more complicated for those left behind than they originally expected. The idea that someone could simply choose peace over conflict and do it without fanfare invites everyone else to reflect on whether the old behavior was really worth it. Was the gossip, the disrespect, or the constant pressure something that justified losing someone's company? People are quick to notice what's missing when things are suddenly calmer but also emptier. With time, the effects of the void evolve. Sometimes the people or group left behind will make improvements and become more aware of how they treat others. Other times, the loss of someone who refused to tolerate negativity becomes a reminder for future reference. They might start being kind of wary with new people, remembering what it was like to lose you. That memory can change how they handle disagreements, boundaries, and even their willingness to address problems before they drive someone out again. Curiously, some of the most dramatic realizations don't happen immediately after you disappear. It's only after days, weeks, or sometimes even months have gone by when people notice they're not feeling better or getting the kind of closure they want that the truth sinks in. The story they told themselves about you, about why you left and what it meant, becomes harder to stick to when real life is quieter and emptier without your presence. That's when real introspection can begin. The void is no longer just your absence. It's a reminder of what went wrong and a cue for change if the people left behind are honest enough to look at it closely. In relationships where there were big disagreements or betrayals, the silence of your absence can be the strongest push toward regret. Some people might reach a place where they truly wish things had gone differently, not just because they lost your company, but because being left alone with their own thoughts forces them to feel the consequences of their actions. Others, even if they never say it out loud, grow from having to face the reality that someone chose not to participate in negativity anymore. The cycle stops with your departure, making it harder to pretend things were fine as long as you were there. For some, there's relief mixed in with the discomfort. If the dynamic was unhealthy for both sides, your decision to disappear might nudge them toward their own healing. They can take a closer look at their own habits, patterns, and role in the conflict. Sometimes, what starts as confusion and discomfort becomes gratitude, for the space to figure out what they actually want moving forward. It's not always dramatic or even obvious on the surface, but your absence, by leaving issues unsolved, forces those left behind to think, adjust, and maybe, just maybe, grow. When there's a real void, not just in words, but in presence, people start comparing what life was like before versus after you stepped back. Maybe they notice less drama, but also less laughter. Or the honesty and reliability they took for granted doesn't show up the way it used to. Sometimes the realization only hits when a similar situation arises and no one handles it like you did. That's when it truly becomes obvious just how much your effort, kindness, or willingness to stay positive meant, even if it didn't always feel appreciated at the time. With every quiet absence, there's also an end to certain cycles. Without someone always willing to keep peace or take responsibility for other people's mistakes, those old roles can't continue. The person on the other end might try to spark a reaction by reaching out or creating drama, but if that's met with nothing but silence, even the most persistent energies eventually start to fade. Some might turn inward, realizing they now have to address their own issues because you're no longer available to help, smooth things over, or take the blame. The experience of being left without closure is different for everyone, and so are the lessons people take from it. Some grow, others stay stuck, and a few try to repeat the same patterns with new people, not realizing why it keeps ending the same way. But for most, even if they never fully articulate it, your silence becomes a turning point, a memory they carry into other relationships, sometimes more careful, sometimes kinder, sometimes simply a little more thoughtful before things get out of hand. As time goes on, the way the void is felt changes. At first, it might be all about confusion or irritation. Why did things just end like that? But over weeks or months, that confusion turns into a reality check. There's a lack of comfort, of familiarity, and of the stabilizing force you once were. Some people try denying what happened, while others quietly process and move forward. The absence you left doesn't fade. It sticks around, changing form from an open question to a closed chapter, but still influencing how the story unfolds for everyone involved. People who see someone leave quietly without burning bridges sometimes hold on to hope that you'll return. That hope keeps them occasionally reflecting on what went down, and some might even use it as motivation to do better if they get another chance. Others become more guarded, recognizing that anyone can walk away and that real connection requires effort and honesty. Even if nothing dramatic happens, the next time they're in a similar situation, something in them recalls having lost someone because they didn't both listen and act differently. The impact on self-perception is worth mentioning as well. If the person or group you left behind resented you, liked you, or just counted on you to be consistent, your decision to opt out can spark unexpected self-doubt. Questions creep in. Am I the problem? Did I push too hard? What does this say about me? Sometimes these questions lead to better self-awareness over time, and sometimes they lead to defensiveness or blame shifting. Either way, the process of facing those questions, even if quietly, is part of what makes your silent withdrawal such a powerful act. Sometimes the psychological aftermath pushes people to reach for substitutes, trying to fill the gap with other relationships, busyness, or even new conflicts. But as time passes, that strategy rarely fixes the deeper questions your absence brought up. When the distractions fade, when a new conflict doesn't feel the same or a new person isn't willing to take your place, the hollow feeling returns. It's then that a kind of respect can grow, even if unspoken. People finally see that not everything can be replaced, and not everyone will accept being mistreated. Looking at group dynamics, your quiet disappearance can expose patterns that might not have been obvious before. Maybe new roles are formed, new alliances are made, or old problems become too big to ignore now that you're not there to smooth them over. These shifts sometimes prompt healthier conversations, or at least make people more willing to address the real source of negativity or division. The space you leave behind isn't just empty. It's always an invitation to do better, even if that invitation isn't taken up right away. The funny thing is, even if you never see or hear from the people you walked away from again, they're likely to carry some piece of that void forward. Maybe it's a story they recount when conflict comes up. Maybe it's a lesson they don't quite put into words but feel whenever a tough situation arises. You probably won't know all the changes your absence triggers, just as they may not fully understand everything about why you left. But your choice to disappear leaves an imprint, one that's not erased just because life keeps moving forward. Sometimes the most surprising result is that years later, long after the details have faded, the feeling of your absence stays clear. Whether it was a friendship, a job, or a relationship, people look back and remember the moment things changed. Not with a bang, but with a quiet stop. The emptiness is a reminder, sometimes tender and sometimes sharp, of what happens when someone refuses to keep tolerating negativity and simply steps out of the pattern altogether. In this way, the psychological impact of leaving quietly is much deeper than most expect. It goes beyond immediate discomfort or confusion. It plants seeds of reflection and sometimes even a little bit of longing for something better. People often say you never really know what you have until it's gone, but when someone disappears not with cruelty, but with quiet self-respect, that lesson becomes so much clearer and much harder to ignore. That's the real impact your silence can have, not as a punishment, but as a mirror and a catalyst, quietly shaping the future for everyone it touches. It's clear that when someone quietly steps away from a situation, their absence lingers, often for a long time. That quiet can echo even more powerfully when you think about how history's great figures dealt with the pressures and struggles of their own lives. If you look at the way Marcus Aurelius approached the world around him, you'll see a perfect example of turning away from the urge to fight fire with fire. Here was a man who had all the power any person could want. He was the Emperor of Rome, controlling armies and decisions that shaped history. But as surprising as it sounds, Marcus wasn't interested in revenge or dramatic responses, even with all that authority. Instead, his own way of dealing with problems was completely different. He always brought things back to his response, his own character and his own calm. There's something practical in the way Marcus wrote about conflict and disappointment. He kept a journal, his Meditations, where he talked honestly about his struggles and frustrations. Unlike the stories we usually hear about big leaders or people in control, Marcus Aurelius didn't brag about victories over others. He didn't write about getting even. Pretty often he actually described how he stopped himself from flying off the handle, how he would remind himself that people could be unfair or self-centered, and that this was simply a part of life. He believed that if you were always focused on getting back at others or demanding justice in every tiny way, your whole life would become tangled up in those small fights. That wasn't the life he wanted, and it's not the life he encouraged anyone else to live either. Every day, people face unfair treatment, sarcasm, jealousy, or even outright attacks. It can be at work, inside families, or with friends. And even though it feels natural to want to win or set the record straight, Marcus offers a different perspective. He wrote that our real power comes from how we react, not from getting the upper hand over those who hurt us. There's real freedom in realizing you don't have to chase every insult or right every wrong. Your energy can be spent on something better, on building your own life, on staying true to your values, on finding peace inside yourself. It's a tempting idea to believe that getting back at someone or proving your point is what gives you closure. What Marcus Aurelius found, and what a lot of us discover over time, is that those victories are often empty. The feeling of satisfaction from a comeback or a dramatic walkout fades quickly, and you're usually left with exhaustion or regret. Marcus argued that the strongest kind of person is the one who can let go, who can face an attack and simply choose not to pick up that fight. It's not that these moments don't hurt. They can sting for a long time. But when you don't let yourself get dragged down by pettiness, you leave more space for what really matters: your own clarity, your quiet, your strength. Marcus Aurelius had an unusual sense of what strength looks like. For him, it wasn't about showing off or being the loudest voice. He repeatedly wrote that self-restraint, or not being ruled by your first emotional reaction, was a sign of being truly brave. When something happens that sets you off, a rude comment, a betrayal, even being left out, it's completely normal to feel angry, hurt, or defensive. But Marcus would ask, what good will it do if I act based only on that feeling? Will it solve the problem, or will it make it worse? He didn't deny his reactions, he admitted them openly, but he worked every day to answer them with calm instead of chaos. This is even more powerful when you remember that Marcus wasn't living in a safe or simple world. He was running an empire surrounded by political games, personal threats, and even war. If anyone had excuses to lash out or look for revenge, it was him. Yet he always circled back to the question of, how do I want to behave? What kind of person do I want to be? Not, how do I make others pay for what they've done? That shift in focus created a kind of independence for him. No matter what others said or did, he refused to give them the power to control his own mindset or behavior. When you think about all this, you start to see a pattern. The more you respond with restraint and dignity, even in small situations, the less power others have over how you feel. Suddenly, you're not their puppet. You don't have to match their mood or their level of drama. Your energy and attention are yours to use as you want. That's what Marcus was getting at when he called this attitude a kind of transcendence. It means you rise above what's going on, instead of diving straight into the mess or letting yourself be pulled under. The moment you walk away from petty fights, you experience a different kind of relief. You remember that peace has a value that isn't always obvious in the heat of an argument. Other people might get louder, might push for a reaction, or even try to guilt you into re-engaging. But the silence you choose isn't about weakness. It sends a message, not to punish, but to say, this is not worth sacrificing my energy or my mood. That's a kind of freedom that gets stronger every time you practice it. For Marcus, every interaction was a chance to practice this skill. If you think about a normal day, you're probably presented with dozens of small situations where someone is difficult, aggressive, or negative. Maybe it's an annoying coworker, someone pushing your boundaries online, or a relative who knows just how to get under your skin. Marcus Aurelius would remind himself daily, and his writing shows how often these reminders were needed. Don't let yourself react on autopilot. Take a breath, consider your response, and sometimes the best thing you can do is nothing at all. You conserve that energy for yourself and don't add more fuel to situations that have no solution. The biggest takeaway is that this kind of quiet power isn't just for philosophers or emperors from 2,000 years ago. Every person, in every walk of life, has moments where they can choose to transcend a situation, to pause, decide not to escalate, and refuse to be trapped by the cycle of retaliation. It's a tool anyone can use. And the truth is, the more you experience its benefits, the more natural it becomes. You might notice after a while that you're less tired at the end of the week, or that certain conversations no longer bother you the way they used to. Sometimes people worry that by stepping back or refusing to fight, they'll be seen as passive or as if they don't care. But Marcus made it clear, this isn't about giving up, it's about winning in a different way. You win by not getting poisoned by negativity and by keeping your dignity. You show strength by being able to endure discomfort without letting it define you or your actions. This is what a lot of people today would call emotional intelligence or resilience, but Marcus just saw it as common sense. Why let other people decide how your day goes or how you feel about yourself? There's another thing Marcus emphasized, a kind of realism about what people are like. In his world, and in ours today, people act out of anger, fear, or jealousy all the time. To expect anything different is only going to lead to disappointment. Knowing this, you get better at not taking every interaction so personally. Marcus was constantly reminding himself, this isn't about me. It's about where that other person is at. That dose of realism lets you release some of the baggage and makes it easier to opt out of pointless arguments. A big part of what makes this approach effective is how it influences the people around you. When you start responding differently, when you don't escalate, don't take the bait, and just quietly move on, others take notice. Maybe not immediately, but over time, they realize you're not available for the same old drama. The people who truly value you might even start modeling your behavior themselves, lowering the temperature of conversations and opening up space for better connections. Even those who don't change can't help but notice that you're seeing things from a higher vantage point, one where their words and actions just don't stick to you in the same way. This approach doesn't mean you let everyone walk all over you or that you become a doormat. Marcus Aurelius was still an active leader. He made tough choices, set boundaries, and stood his ground. The difference was in how he carried himself internally. His emotions didn't run the show. He knew which fights were worth engaging in and which ones only caused more damage. If something truly mattered, he met it calmly and directly. If not, he let it pass, knowing his peace of mind was more important than any small victory. If you're dealing with a difficult person or situation, it might help to try what Marcus did. Pause and ask yourself if getting involved will actually change anything for the better. If the answer is no, then leaving it alone is usually the best answer. Sometimes you'll be surprised at how quickly the drama dissolves on its own. When you don't react, there's no story to build from, no fire to keep alive. People eventually move on, and you avoid the emotional hangover of having said or done things that didn't line up with your values. This is also a strategy for taking back your own agency. By choosing how you respond, even when you're hurt or insulted, you keep the control in your hands. Marcus talked about agency all the time, the importance of making your own choices, especially when other people are trying to get a rise out of you. The ability to stick with your own principles, to choose your reaction, is empowering. It can be the difference between a day lost to anger and bitterness and a day where you stay grounded no matter what. Another thing to keep in mind is that this mindset goes hand in hand with self-care. Marcus Aurelius believed in looking after your own body and mind, not in a pampering way, but because he understood that burnout and resentment come from always being in conflict mode. Transcending retaliation means more nights of sleep, more energy for things you want to do, and easier relationships with the people who matter. It's about creating a foundation where negativity can't take root. When you hear all this, it's easy to imagine Marcus as this perfectly calm and patient person. That's not quite true. He wrote about his failures all the time. He messed up, lost his temper, regretted things. His greatness came from returning again and again to his principles, choosing, sometimes a dozen times a day, to move on instead of getting stuck. So it's not about being flawless, but about practicing, about picking yourself up and making the same choice again and again. Over time, the impulse to retaliate weakens, and the habit of letting go becomes second nature. It's worth also pointing out that this approach works no matter what role you play in life. Whether you're a boss or an intern, a parent or a sibling, a friend or a stranger, you can choose to transcend cycles of anger and retaliation. Every person has that power, and using it doesn't just lift the burden off your own shoulders. It often makes life easier for everyone around you. The people who interact with you know what to expect: calm, fairness, and the ability to step back rather than lash out. If you start living like this for weeks or even months, you'll probably notice some changes in yourself. You may find yourself less reactive in stressful moments, more able to focus on what really matters, and more able to walk away without guilt when things are clearly not worth fixing. You'll notice the kind of people who want to stay around you shifts. Those who seek drama drift away, and those who respect your approach hang around. That alone makes life less complicated. One unexpected benefit is the trust you build with yourself. Each time you choose not to retaliate, not to jump into negativity, you prove to yourself that you're reliable. That trust becomes a foundation for bigger things, like trying new paths or handling big setbacks with confidence. When you stop letting others set the tone for your emotional life, you start leading it yourself. That is something Marcus Aurelius held in high regard, the idea that no matter what the world threw at him, he could always choose his response. Of course, you'll slip up. Everyone does. There will be days you just can't help but get pulled back into an argument or say something you regret. That's all part of growing. What matters is being honest about it, learning, and picking up your practice where you left off. It's fair to say Marcus forgave himself a lot, which helped him keep moving forward. There's no need to expect perfection. What really counts is building a habit of transcendence, of rising above again and again. By following this sort of path, what you find at the end isn't just a lack of conflict or fewer arguments. You find clarity, confidence, and most of all, a sense of freedom from other people's chaos. Marcus set the bar for us not in waging war or winning arguments, but in coming home to himself every time things got rough. He made it clear that retaliation isn't the solution. It just traps you in a spiral. But with each choice to do better and be better, you free yourself and even inspire people around you to do the same. Living this way does not make life perfect or problem-free. It does, however, make it possible to weather challenges without losing touch with who you are. It creates the space for real growth, deeper relationships, and a kind of self-respect that can't be shaken by bad moods or other people's mistakes. That is the legacy of Marcus Aurelius. By mastering yourself, by transcending the urge to fight back at every slight, you discover that walking away or staying silent can be the most powerful move of all. When you get to the point of truly understanding what people like Marcus Aurelius were actually practicing, you start to see how much there is to gain from not holding on or getting stuck in cycles of reaction. This approach makes a difference in day-to-day life, not just in those rare, dramatic moments, but in the regular, messy business of dealing with people and situations that just don't serve you. What often gets overlooked is how letting go and stepping back isn't a sign that you've been defeated. In fact, it's the most direct path to getting back your sense of agency, your ability to actually be in charge of yourself instead of getting pulled around by every bit of negativity or drama thrown your way. If you think for a second about how often we end up reacting out of habit, you'll notice how much energy gets tied up in just responding, defending yourself, explaining yourself, or trying to get others to understand your point of view. Detachment, in a practical sense, is that moment when you realize you don't have to always answer, you don't have to keep fighting or fixing things, and you certainly don't have to stay where you're not respected. This idea in the old Stoic tradition is almost like setting a healthy boundary, but with an extra layer. You also stop letting others control what you think and feel inside. When you walk away from a bad situation or leave behind relationships that run on stress, manipulation, or constant conflict, you take the power you used to hand over to other people and return it to yourself. At first, this feels confusing or even lonely, especially if you've been giving that power away for a long time. There can be doubts, and it might take a while before you trust yourself to keep that energy focused on what actually matters to you. But even early on, the feeling of relief is real. You wake up with more clarity, your mind's less tangled, and you can actually taste the difference between peace and constant tension. What's especially interesting is that a lot of the time, we don't even see how trapped we were until we take a break from the old cycle. There's a difference in waking up and not immediately checking your messages to see if someone's mad at you. There's freedom in not constantly rehearsing what you'll say the next time an argument starts. The moments you get back aren't huge at first. They're just these regular, simple days where you can focus your attention and effort on things that actually fill you up, instead of pouring your time into leaks that never get fixed. Reclaiming power by letting go doesn't mean cutting yourself off from the world. It's actually a step toward reconnecting with what's authentic in you. Instead of operating from a place of exhaustion or fear, you're able to switch into a mode where you choose, not just react. Maybe you start making decisions based on what you want, instead of what you're afraid someone will think. You notice yourself caring less about approval or drama. You have more patience for things that matter, and much less for anything that drains you. This might sound too simple, but it's often what a peaceful life actually looks like. Steady, intentional, and surprisingly free. If you start building this habit gradually, you realize how detachment is protective in day-to-day ways. When someone tries to draw you back into a fight or guilt you for putting up boundaries, you don't feel the same pull. Their reactions stop bouncing around in your thoughts. You know where you end and where others begin. One of the main benefits here is that you save so much mental and emotional energy. Energy you can now put into relationships and projects that make you feel alive. You get to put your time where it has an actual return, rather than spending it all cleaning up someone else's mess or fighting battles you never signed up for. This process is rarely immediate. Most people have to practice letting go over and over, sometimes for months or even years, before it starts to feel natural. At the beginning, every time you step away, you might second-guess yourself or fear you're abandoning someone. But each time you respect your own limits, you collect small pieces of evidence that freedom is actually possible. You start trusting that you're not responsible for carrying everything or everyone. That change doesn't make you colder. It gives you space to care in a genuine way without losing yourself in the process. There will always be pushback, especially from people who are used to getting a response from you every time they demanded it. It's normal for them to try extra hard at first, maybe reaching out more, trying to push your buttons, or questioning your choices. They might even label you as selfish for putting yourself first. But as you stick with your choice, as you keep letting the phone ring or walking away from pointless debates, that pressure dies down. People figure out you're not an easy target anymore. Eventually, they either respect your boundaries or drift away to find someone else to play the old games with. Detachment isn't coldness. A lot of times, people confuse the two. But letting go means choosing yourself over drama, not closing yourself off from real connection or kindness. In fact, when you're less wrapped up in emotional roller coasters, you actually have more room to listen, to be patient, and to be present in relationships that deserve that energy. Detachment filters out the noise so you can appreciate the people and experiences that help you grow. Connection becomes a choice, not a duty or an obligation mixed with resentment. Another thing that shows up as you keep detaching is a new sense of perspective. Situations that once seemed like they controlled your mood stop mattering as much as they used to. The opinions or bad days of others don't set the tempo for your whole week. This isn't just about ignoring negativity, it's about seeing it as something that simply belongs to someone else. You stop feeling the need to fix things, defend yourself, or manage how everyone feels about every topic. You notice you're living your own life again. You're able to look at setbacks or disappointments differently too. Where you once might have been spiraling for days after a rough conversation, now you're able to process it, learn from it, and then let it pass. Your mind moves on more efficiently. Your priorities get clearer. You start setting goals for yourself that aren't tied up in proving anything to anyone. And on those rough days where it's hard to let go, you've practiced this skill enough to know that peace will come back, as long as you stick with your own boundaries. There's a very real impact on your overall well-being. The ongoing stress you were carrying starts to lessen. Physically, you sleep better, your headaches and tension might let up, and you've got more energy left at the end of the day. Emotionally, you move from feeling trapped or helpless to feeling light, open, and more in control. That's the reward for letting go. Rather than being managed by situations outside of your control, you lead from your center. You start seeing yourself with more respect too. Every time you make a hard choice, not defending yourself, not texting back, not re-engaging in an old fight, you tell yourself, my peace matters. My life belongs to me. It's not about being right or wrong. Sometimes people still won't understand why you stepped away, or they'll still talk about you behind your back. The difference is, you don't carry their opinions as a weight anymore. You're too busy living your own life. It's also easier to spot the kind of people and situations that aren't worth your energy in the first place. Your radar for drama gets sharper. You know what warning signs to look for, those subtle feelings of dread, irritation, or confusion that show up early in bad dynamics. Now that you're not afraid of letting go, you move on much earlier, before things have a chance to get complicated. This saves time and emotional energy for healthier connections and more fulfilling work. As you practice detachment, your sense of self becomes more grounded. You know what you stand for, what's important, and what isn't up for negotiation anymore. You get better at returning to your center when things get stressful or overwhelming. Where you used to second-guess your instincts or feel guilty for taking care of yourself, now you're confident about it. The small choices add up, building a stronger, happier version of yourself over time. Letting go often leads to unexpected opportunities. When your brain isn't buzzing with anxious thoughts or defensive scripts, you spot chances to try new things, meet new people, or work on projects you'd been putting off. You notice inspiration more often. You wake up with more hope, and you feel more creative. The freedom that comes from not being locked into old patterns gives you the energy and headspace to say yes to growth. Reclaiming your power also lets you enjoy the present moment. Whether you're going for a walk, hanging out with a friend, or just relaxing, your mind is actually there, not wandering off into what-ifs or the next possible conflict. You can finally feel gratitude for simple things. The feeling that something bad is about to happen fades. Security comes from knowing you're looking out for yourself and can walk away if something doesn't feel right. The process is gradual and sometimes a little uneven. Some days will feel amazing, and others will be a challenge. Occasionally, an old trigger might bring up the urge to jump back into a cycle, but it passes more quickly each time you remind yourself why you chose peace to begin with. You remember that your well-being has to come first, and you notice it's easier to get back to your baseline after setbacks. This builds a kind of emotional resilience that sticks with you in future challenges. Sometimes you notice people around you start to change too. Maybe they see you withdrawing energy from negativity, and it makes them curious. How are you staying so calm, or why don't those things bother you anymore? Even if they don't say it out loud, your example can encourage others to set their own boundaries or drop the need for constant validation. You model self-respect just by taking care of yourself. Letting go, of course, doesn't mean you're immune to sadness or anger. Sometimes a situation you had to detach from was deeply meaningful to you, and there will be grief. But even that pain feels cleaner somehow, less tangled up in guilt or regret. You know you did what you had to do. You allowed yourself to prioritize your needs for once. That acceptance is a big part of what real healing is made of. You don't have to give speeches or announce your boundaries big and loud. Often, it's the quiet choices made day after day that signal to yourself and to others that you've changed. Maybe it's not texting back when a conversation is just heading nowhere. Maybe it's leaving a group chat that always brings you down. Maybe it's walking out of a room or ending a call before things get toxic. These actions add up to a new baseline, a version of yourself that's unwilling to go back to old patterns just to keep the peace. Eventually, detachment brings a sneakier kind of power. It frees your imagination, your decision-making, and your sense of possibility. There's more room for hope, accomplishment, and real satisfaction. You remember what it's like to look forward to your days, not just survive them. You notice the world is bigger than you remembered, full of people who respect boundaries and spaces that aren't always on edge. Taking your power back by letting go teaches you that you don't need to be at the center of every problem or conversation. You don't need to fix everything or be available to everyone. The sense of liberation grows quietly, until you look back and barely recognize the person who was always on the defensive. Now, your focus is on growth, not survival. Your attention goes to possibilities, not problems. This shift has a ripple effect that keeps going. The choices you make to preserve your peace inspire confidence in others. The healthier relationships you build bring more stability and joy. Your days have a sense of direction and calm that used to feel out of reach. Little by little, you realize you're living your life, not just reacting to it. When you get used to detachment as a practice, you realize it isn't about avoiding feelings or pretending you don't care. Instead, it's about being honest with yourself about what's worth your effort and what isn't. Whenever you step away, you're making a statement. You matter. Your peace is not up for negotiation. No matter how long it takes, that choice builds the trust and freedom that makes everything else in your life brighter and more meaningful. There's no finish line or single day when you declare yourself done. As long as you're growing, there will always be new situations where you get to practice letting go, resetting, and coming back to your values. With every cycle, you learn more about yourself, get braver about putting your energy first, and see more clearly what kind of life is possible when you stop handing over your power. The end result is simple. You get to live your life by your own rules, with space for peace, love, and everything else that's truly yours. After a while, you start noticing that this new way of living, stepping back, letting go of old dramas, taking care of your own energy, actually opens up a surprising amount of space in your life. What fills that space isn't always clear at first. A lot of people talk about the initial discomfort of the quiet, especially when you're used to constant texting, background conversations, or just the daily mental noise from people and situations that used to fill your hours. That kind of silence can feel odd, even lonely. But what might come as a surprise is how that quiet period, once you give it a real chance, actually begins to feel like fresh air for your mind and your emotions. It's not just being alone. It's a real opportunity to experience growth in a way that wasn't possible before. When your daily life is always linked up with conflict, expectation, or the approval of other people, there isn't much room left for your own thoughts to wander freely. The first days or weeks after creating distance, sometimes by ending a toxic cycle, sometimes by just stepping away for a while, can feel almost empty. People get nervous in that emptiness because they're not used to it. A lot of us have been conditioned to think that if life gets quiet, something must be wrong or missing. But as time passes, you realize that the quiet is just a pause, a chance to pay attention to what you actually want from your life, without outside pressure. With more solitude, little things begin to stand out. You might notice you're remembering dreams you had as a kid, or that you finally have time for simple pleasures, like sitting in the sun or finding new music you actually like. There's a natural period of rediscovering what you enjoy and what makes you curious. You figure out your own tastes and opinions again, not filtered through someone else's agenda. It's a phase where your sense of self begins to reset. It might not be dramatic, but it's real and, even better, lasting. One huge benefit of this kind of solitude is mental clarity. When you aren't constantly untangling arguments in your head or predicting someone else's reaction, your thinking becomes sharper. Decisions about what to do with your day or where you want to put your energy stop feeling overwhelming. You can actually hear yourself think. This can lead to noticeable changes, even in simple things, like the style of clothes you want to wear, the food you remember enjoying, or the interests that faded into the background when life was too noisy. All of a sudden, you have real choice because your energy is fully yours again. Solitude also tends to highlight whatever you haven't processed from past experiences. Sometimes, after you've been caught up in problems or toxic cycles for a long time, you push away your own feelings just to get through the day. But the quiet moments bring those feelings back up, which can feel heavy at first. Some people describe it as an emotional detox. Old sadness, anger, or anxiety comes to the surface when you're not distracted anymore. Even though it might be uncomfortable, this is actually a good thing. You can deal with these emotions for real, at your own pace, without anyone else's opinions making it harder. Personal development during solitude often starts slow. It's a phase where you can look at what happened honestly, what worked, what didn't, how much you gave, what you want to do differently next time. You form your own opinions, not just about others, but also about yourself. Many people realize, sometimes for the first time in years, that they're more capable than they thought. You find out you like your own company. Instead of being just the peacekeeper or the one fixing everything, you find yourself becoming other things, creative, resilient, or just calm. In this period, it's pretty common to try new things, sometimes just out of curiosity. Maybe you start reading new books, exploring new places, or picking up hobbies that got lost in all the stress. You notice you have more energy to invest in healthier relationships or more space to try out different career moves. With nothing and no one pulling your attention in a million directions, you're free to experiment, mistakes included, without feeling judged. Each small step creates more confidence to keep growing, even if you don't feel brave every single day. Another quiet shift happens in how you handle old wounds. Without constant conflict or outside voices adding pressure, you give yourself permission to take as long as you need to process pain or disappointment. That might mean extra naps, long walks, or just afternoons doing nothing. You aren't rushing to explain your feelings, and you don't have to justify why you need space. This gentle pace lets you heal without the risk of reopening wounds just to satisfy someone else's timeline or ideas of closure. Over time, you also notice your priorities shift. You stop putting energy into things that drain you. You start looking for friendships or projects that actually feel nourishing, things that grow your sense of self instead of chipping away at it. Solitude teaches you that you don't have to accept everything just to keep busy or feel wanted. Instead, you become more selective with where you spend your time. It's a subtle but powerful change. The quality of your life improves because you're choosing what works for you instead of what you think you have to endure. With more distance comes the ability to see old habits for what they were. Maybe you realize you used to stay in situations too long, or you recognize patterns you don't want to repeat. You catch the early warning signs of stress or toxicity faster because you're not numb anymore. This is where real transformation happens. You adjust, not because you read about it or someone told you to, but because you feel the benefits every single day. You don't need external approval to prove to yourself that you've grown. Physical changes often mirror what's shifting on the inside. People report sleeping better, having fewer headaches, or feeling less exhausted all the time. Some might start moving their body more or taking better care of their space, not because they're told to, but because it finally feels good again. What used to feel like work now just feels like another way of expressing care for yourself. These changes aren't forced by discipline, but by a sense of well-being that comes from inside. Solitude can also sharpen your sense of boundaries. Once you learn what real peace feels like, it's hard to let others disturb it. You're quicker to notice when a person or situation isn't healthy. Sometimes that means saying no, setting new limits, or just choosing not to get involved in situations that used to hook you in. You show up differently in all your relationships, with more understanding, more patience, and less need to control. Even old friends and family notice the change, sometimes adjusting to meet you on those new, healthier terms. After enough time on your own, you might feel ready to reconnect with others, but now from a place of wholeness. Instead of needing external approval, your sense of self is solid. You know your triggers, you know what makes you happy and what drags you back to old patterns. You offer your company because you want to, not because you're trying to fix something for someone else. The quality of your connections changes. Conflict, when it comes up, is easier to recognize and address with less panic or stress. For those who worry about loneliness, it's worth remembering that solitude and loneliness aren't the same thing. When you first step back, loneliness can pop up. It's natural, a reaction to change, to missing old routines or people. But as you build a new routine centered on your own needs and interests, the loneliness softens. What's left is the simple, stable comfort of enjoying your own company. Friendships or relationships, when they do come back into your life, feel more genuine. You don't have to sacrifice parts of yourself to keep them going. This phase of transformation doesn't have a set timeline. Some people feel stronger after a few weeks, others only after months or even years. The important thing is that each day you get more used to silence and to the growth that comes from it. With every small decision in your favor, you reinforce the idea that you're allowed to take up space, to have your own life, and to keep your boundaries as long as you need. As you let new interests and insights settle, there's often a jump in self-esteem. You aren't as easily rattled by criticism or setbacks because you see yourself more clearly. You recognize your worth, not just in theory, but in how you actually live. The need to explain yourself drops away. That sense of inner security is the solid ground you take into every new interaction, challenge, or opportunity. If you look back to before this period of solitude, it becomes obvious how much change has occurred. Regular moments that used to cause anxiety just don't trigger you anymore. Conversations that once felt exhausting now either flow or end quickly. More days feel light and meaningful. Growth is no longer a distant goal. It's just a result of giving yourself the chance to be free from old patterns. Interestingly, this comfort with being alone often makes you a better friend, partner, or co-worker. Because you aren't desperate for attention or validation, you're able to really listen, offer support, or even walk away when that's the healthiest choice. You bring balance and calm to group settings, which often draws more genuine connections toward you. People sense when you're at ease with yourself. Your interactions start coming from a place of giving, not of needing. With this new perspective, your ambitions might evolve too. Instead of chasing after what others expect of you, you get clear on what you actually want. You can set goals for your career, hobbies, or even relationships that match your authentic self. When setbacks happen, you have a well of patience and self-belief to draw from. Your life starts looking less like survival and more like choosing your path every single day. Personal growth through solitude is both subtle and powerful. It doesn't rely on anyone else seeing or confirming your progress. It's in the small things, being able to say no, feeling excitement about the future, liking your own company, having hobbies that light you up, and watching the opinion of others take up less and less space in your mind. That slow shift is how real change happens. As more time passes and you get better at being with yourself, you come to value silence as something positive, even necessary. In between life's busyness, you search for those quiet moments because they feel safe and inspiring. You gain a sense of control over your mood and your schedule. You know that if things get tough again, there's always space to return to, a private, peaceful foundation that's yours, no matter what changes around you. If you were to give advice to anyone scared of solitude, it might be as simple as this: give it time. At first it feels strange, but in the quiet, you remember things about yourself you forgot under the stress of chaotic connections or endless worry. You start growing in ways you simply can't when your life is tuned to someone else's channel all day. With patience, what felt empty becomes full, and what felt scary becomes the best kind of independence. The transformative power of solitude is real, even if it sneaks up on you. You find yourself more creative, kinder to others, and more protective of your peace. Personal boundaries feel natural, not forced. You learn to trust your instincts and move through life at your own pace. Even when noisy or stressful situations come back, you know how to step back into quiet, regroup, and keep moving forward. With all this, it's not about living life isolated or shutting out the world for good. Instead, it's about having the strength to step away, recharge, and return to any situation with a fuller, steadier sense of yourself. Life will keep changing, and conflict will always be part of the human experience, but the growth you find in solitude, real, rooted, and lasting, is something that carries you through whatever comes next. And all that transformation started simply by allowing the silence to do its quiet work. Once you've spent enough time in solitude and started seeing all those subtle but powerful changes in yourself, there's something else that eventually comes up. The urge for answers, the desire for a sense of closure. If you've stepped away from a difficult relationship, a toxic group, or just one of those situations where things were never really resolved, you know the quiet that follows can bring up a lot of unanswered questions. You wonder if that other person ever really understood why you left. You might catch yourself thinking about old conversations, running through what you could have said or done differently, or just feeling the sting of things left unfinished. That's when you run right into the myth of closure, a belief that you can't truly move on until everything is explained, cleared up, and perfectly wrapped. Closure gets talked about everywhere, from movies to relationship advice blogs. We're told again and again that the way to heal is to get answers, to have the talk, to let everyone share their side and then move forward with all cards on the table. But in reality, life is rarely so clean. People may not apologize, they might not agree with your viewpoint, and sometimes they never admit their part in what happened. They can even forget things that hurt you, or remember the whole event in a totally different way. Other times, you simply don't have the option to open an old conversation or revisit the past. The friendship is over, the workplace has changed, or you realize reaching out wouldn't actually make you feel any better. That's when you have to ask, is closure really necessary, or can peace be found even with loose ends? One thing that starts to make sense the longer you're away from an old situation is that the idea of closure can actually keep you stuck. When you get caught up in needing everything explained, you end up putting your own growth on hold while you wait for answers that may never come. Sometimes what you're really seeking isn't just information or apologies, it's validation. Someone to say you were right or to finally see things from your side. But even if that did happen, would it erase all the hurt? Would a single conversation fix months or years of disappointment? Most of the time, it wouldn't. At least not in the way we imagine when we're lonely or missing someone. People who have lived through difficult breakups, ended long friendships, left family conflicts, or even walked away from jobs that drained them all tend to say something similar. The real shift happened not when they got closure, but when they stopped waiting for it. At some point, they realized that peace comes from inside. It comes from deciding that you don't need every question answered and that your worth isn't measured by someone else's ability to reflect on your pain. That shift isn't easy and doesn't happen in a single day, but it's a big step, one that signals you're finally prioritizing your well-being over needing every detail explained. So how do you start letting go of the myth of closure? It usually begins with facing the reality that not everything in life gets resolved. Sometimes people drift apart, words remain unsaid, or confusion hangs in the air forever. You may never know if that friend regrets how things ended, or if the coworker who always undermined you is even aware of the impact they had. Even with family, where ties often run deep, full understanding or apology might never come. Accepting these facts is uncomfortable at first, but it's also freeing, because it means you can stop chasing after something that isn't really necessary for your healing. Instead, you start to focus on what's in your control. You reclaim your time and invest your attention elsewhere. Little by little, you realize that you can feel sad or disappointed without needing to fix it or receive answers. Your energy goes back into your routines, your hobbies, and new connections instead of circling around the same old questions. Sometimes there are waves of longing or regret, and that's natural, but you ride them out knowing they're just part of the process, not a sign that you have to go back or reopen old wounds. One small but powerful shift happens when you accept that you may never know the full story. Maybe you misunderstood something, or maybe you were absolutely right. Often, it's a messy mix of both. But not needing to untangle every thread means you leave space for new experiences. You're no longer defined by what someone else did or failed to do. Every day you don't reach out or try to resolve the past gives you fresh proof that peace is possible on your own terms. This isn't the same as pretending nothing happened. In fact, it's about being honest that life includes loose ends. Some relationships end with confusion. Some conflicts remain unfinished. You learn to sit with that discomfort, rather than rushing to tie it up just so you can move on. That honesty is a big part of growing up and getting stronger emotionally. You develop a level of self-trust and maturity that extends far beyond one situation. You start to realize, I can handle not knowing. I can be okay, even if the past doesn't get a final answer. Often, you'll notice that things you thought would haunt you forever start to matter less over time. It might take weeks, months, or even years, but gradually, old wounds stop feeling so sharp. Unanswered questions fade into the background as new interests and people enter your life. The urge to check up on someone, stalk their social media, or try to decode old text messages loses its pull. You spend your time in the present simply because the present starts to feel fuller. People sometimes worry that letting go of closure means giving up hope or being stuck with pain. The reality is the opposite. Letting go gives you back your power. It lets you choose where your attention goes. You start deciding what matters in your life, not just reacting to what happened long ago. You find that you're able to make peace with the unknown. You may still wonder about the people who hurt you or feel sadness about the way things ended. But that sadness becomes a memory, not an anchor. A lot of us have grown up with the idea that relationships or situations require neat endings. But in real life, there are breakups that never make sense, jobs that end with no explanation, and family relationships that don't get fixed no matter how many conversations you have. Changing your expectations isn't about lowering your standards for happiness. It's about acknowledging reality so you can live in it, instead of always fighting against what's missing. This change brings relief and eventually contentment. As you spend more time choosing peace over answers, you probably begin to notice that your need for constant validation drops. You feel stronger because you know your perspective is just as valid as anyone else's, even if it was never acknowledged. The search for closure was really a search for stability, and realizing you can provide that for yourself is a major turning point. It spills over into new relationships too. You don't chase after reassurance or approval in the same desperate way. You can disagree or even part ways with people knowing it won't destroy you. An unexpected benefit of releasing closure is that you see people more realistically. The person you were waiting on to give you answers might not have the capacity to do so. Maybe they're dealing with their own issues, or maybe their personality makes open discussion impossible. You stop expecting people to act out of character just to make you feel better. This doesn't mean you don't care. It means you allow others to be themselves, warts and all, while choosing what role, if any, they'll have in your life. Sometimes, after you stop chasing closure, life brings surprises. People might come back years later to explain or apologize, or maybe someone else helps you see the old situation in a new light. Because you're not hanging all your happiness on that moment, you're able to accept it for what it is, not as something that will fix everything. You get to enjoy good moments as they come, instead of hinging them all on unfinished business. Of course, there are days where uncertainty feels heavy. You may have a sudden urge to reach out or explain yourself one more time. That's normal. You can let yourself feel sad or frustrated without reading too much into it or making dramatic decisions. These feelings pass, and with every time they do, you get a little stronger. You see that your life goes on whether or not the old story gets closure. Your future isn't held hostage by the past. There's also something valuable in the fact that closure is internal. Even if you got an answer from someone, it wouldn't change how you feel unless you decide that it will. The same event can be explained in a dozen different ways, none of which truly satisfy. What really creates peace is giving yourself permission to move on. It's not always easy, but it's the kind of work that pays off each time you choose your present over your past. You learn over time that not every apology needs to be accepted in person to have an effect. Sometimes you forgive people quietly and never tell them. Sometimes you find out that you can let go of a grudge just by choosing to. None of this means forgetting or pretending nothing happened. It's just a way of keeping your heart and mind open to new things. It's practical, not magical, and it's available to anyone willing to stop chasing the impossible. Letting go of the myth of closure means getting good at tolerating a bit of discomfort. You may need to resist the urge to keep checking on someone or to keep having the same fight in your head. As you get used to this, you fill the space with new habits, pick up skills, reach out to new friends, or start projects that need your attention. Every time you put time toward the future, you train your mind to stop circling the past. The old story has less and less room in your life, edged out by everything you build next. Another important aspect is learning to handle regret. Everyone has moments they wish had gone differently. The key is realizing that regret isn't a problem that needs to be solved, it's just another feeling to move through. You can regret and still move forward. You don't need to redo old conversations in your mind all night to make peace. Give yourself permission to live with some open questions and trust that meaning will come from how you live, not from fixing what's behind you. As you shift your focus from needing closure to creating peace, you get used to living with ambiguity. Uncertainty stops being a threat and starts feeling neutral, even normal. Your confidence grows because you see you can walk through life's loose ends and still be happy. You make choices that align with who you are now, not who you were when the old story was still running your life. The freedom to create your own ending, or even let it stay unfinished, is liberating. The myth of closure is persistent because it promises relief from pain. But a more reliable way to get that relief is to accept that some pain just lingers for a while before it fades out on its own. With enough acceptance, the ache of the past softens, replaced by the satisfaction of living for today. You realize that surrendering the chase for closure was never the same as giving up. It was, in fact, a decision to take your power back from circumstances outside your control. There are plenty of stories out there about people who never got the final apology or the complete explanation. Still, they are able to build good lives, full of connection, meaning, and sometimes even forgiveness. The difference isn't that they were luckier or stronger, just that they made peace with not knowing everything. They chose to believe that their happiness could exist alongside unanswered questions. One day you look around and realize your life is full again. It isn't because the past was sorted out and sealed up. It's because you made a series of small decisions to invest your time, your heart, and your energy in what's ahead. You might even wish the person who couldn't give you closure well, hoping they find their own peace too. That kind of acceptance feels effortless compared to all the old chasing and second-guessing. If you're someone who has been stuck waiting for closure, it's okay. It's human to want to understand, to get answers, and to feel seen. But you don't have to stay stuck there. With time, patience, and kindness toward yourself, you really can learn to put down the need for neat endings. You can grieve for what's lost, accept what's uncertain, and look forward with hope. The peace you were searching for outside yourself was always available on the inside. It just needed space to grow. You're allowed to move on, even if the past never quite adds up. And that freedom is its own form of closure, even if nobody but you knows it happened. When you finally let go of chasing closure and you start living with a bit more acceptance about life's loose ends, something subtle but important starts to happen. Your choices, your attitude, the energy you bring into every room, they begin to leave a bigger mark not just on your own life, but on the people watching you. Even if they never say anything out loud. A lot of us don't realize how visible our actions are, or the kind of example we become simply by refusing to join in negativity, by setting boundaries, or by valuing calm over chaos. Yet, over time, those small decisions can quietly inspire others in ways you never expected. It's easy to think that what you do when you walk away, or when you don't react to provocation, is just about you and your own sanity. But people are always paying attention. Your coworkers, your family, your friends, even acquaintances online. They all notice patterns. They pick up on how you respond to stress, whether you get pulled into gossip, if your mood changes with every problem, or if you keep your cool and focus on what actually matters. When you break the cycle of drama, not with speeches or ultimatums, but just by staying grounded and opting out, it's like you plant a quiet flag for dignity. You prove you don't have to fight every battle or explain every decision, and for some, that's a brand new idea. Think about situations at work, for example. where everyone is stressed, tempers are short, or negativity is just the background noise. If you choose not to join in the complaints, or if you remove yourself calmly from pointless meetings or office arguments, you're sending a message without ever raising your voice. Someone might roll their eyes at first, but a few weeks later they remember that you never seemed desperate for approval and that you protected your focus. Sometimes the effect is that other people start protecting their own focus too. Even if they never thank you or talk about it openly, your restraint is noticed. This plays out in families as well. Imagine growing up in a house where every disagreement turns into a big scene, or where apologizing is a rare event. If, as an adult, you decide not to participate in shouting matches, but instead quietly excuse yourself, don't take sides, or clearly express your boundaries and expectations, you reset the emotional temperature. Over many months or years, others may begin to follow your approach, or at least treat you with the respect you insist upon for yourself. All it takes sometimes is one consistent example of self-restraint to break very old patterns, not by force, but by steady presence. Friends might test your boundaries, especially if you spent years being the fixer or the person who gave in for the sake of keeping peace. The first few times you step back from drama or don't feed the same old arguments, people may think you're just annoyed or going through a phase. If you stick to it, not just one or two times, but over dozens of interactions, something gradually changes. The friends who are drawn to chaos drift off, and newer, more balanced connections emerge. People learn what you'll accept and what you won't. And a few will be genuinely curious. How are you managing to feel calmer these days? That silent, consistent boundary becomes a kind of signpost for others. It's proof that real friendship doesn't rely on drama or one-sided sacrifice. What makes this all work is that your actions speak for themselves. You don't need to lecture, make everyone see things your way, or win people over with big declarations. When you simply remove yourself from harmful cycles and prioritize your peace, others see the difference over time. Even if they say nothing, they know who they can trust with sensitive topics. Kids, especially, are paying even closer attention. They learn how to handle disappointment, anger, and setbacks by watching how adults act. Your choice to remain dignified and steady, to pause instead of explode, can become the blueprint they use as they get older. You might not notice, but your restraint is shaping how someone else handles hard days down the line. There's also an effect on people who cause a lot of conflict or thrive on getting reactions from others. The first time you don't react or come back with a witty retort, they may push harder, test boundaries, or try to bait you even more. But if, time and time again, you choose to disengage, to stay neutral, or to set limits without making it personal, their need for drama loses its power. They have to find someone else to argue with, or sometimes they start mirroring your calm because they see it's more rewarding and gets them more respect. You teach people by example what kind of energy and treatment you'll accept, and anything less just doesn't get a response. A lot of this is about showing people that self-respect doesn't have to be loud or defensive. It can be totally quiet and still shift the culture around you. If you're raising children, mentoring teenagers, leading a team, or just being part of a group, you give permission for everyone to operate with more dignity. Newcomers see quickly that not every room is built for gossip or chaos. Some spaces can be kept healthy simply because one person set the tone with restraint. In online spaces where disagreements can escalate fast and pile on, your example can be especially powerful. When people argue in comment sections, group chats, or communities, it's not the loudest ones who really stick. Instead, it's the calm, consistent voices, and sometimes it's the people who simply opt out. By refusing to engage with trolling, by ignoring toxic threads, or by quietly blocking accounts that bring nothing but stress, you show that not all attention is good attention. You prove it's possible to protect your own mental space without starting a war over every rude remark. Even strangers can start to notice the difference, and it changes how they act too. There's a kind of comfort that people feel when they know where you stand and that you won't flip out over every little thing. They trust your judgment over time, not because you always agree, but because you're steady, polite, and practical. People come to you for advice or just for a sense of stability, and it's because they've seen with their own eyes that you don't go looking for drama. Even if you're not especially close to someone, your reliability and refusal to get sucked into trouble makes you seem like a safe place when things are tense. Sometimes you'll notice another effect. The people who know the old you, the one who used to argue back, who always had to have the last word, are surprised when you don't play along anymore. Maybe you used to lose sleep over disagreements or replay every detail of a fight. Now you sleep better at night and your time is spent on things that matter to you. Over the months or years, they might even ask, "How did you change?" Those questions are openings for real conversations about setting boundaries or finding peace. But the most important lessons still come from your consistent, everyday decisions, not from a single moment of advice. This sort of example actually helps people in your life grow as well. If someone used to rely on you to solve their problems, your stepping back teaches them to handle more on their own. It's not always appreciated at first. Some people get frustrated or accuse you of being selfish. But given time and patience, the people who are truly open to change will learn too. You're showing by action that everyone is responsible for their own happiness and that leaning on others has limits. Building dignity in this way means becoming someone others feel safe around. Not because you're soft or a pushover, but because they know you have self-control and fair expectations. People with dignity tend to attract others with the same qualities, which slowly lifts the general standard of treatment within a group, family, or workplace. You're not the only one who benefits. Everyone does. It becomes a quiet cycle of respect. There's no need to shoot for perfection. Everyone loses their temper now and then or gets pulled into some pointless issue. The difference is, over time, you catch yourself sooner. You apologize when needed, and you learn from experience. That openness about your own limits and mistakes is another way to help others. By seeing someone recover from a slip-up gracefully, people around you worry less about being perfect themselves. This builds trust and lowers the general fear of making mistakes or facing criticism. A lot of this influence is invisible. Most people will never come and tell you directly, "Hey, you inspired me." Sometimes you'll never even know the impact you had. It's in the way kids stop fighting sooner, or the way a colleague deals with setbacks without blaming others. You might notice a friend starts leaving drama-filled group chats, or that an old rival at work stops trying to get a reaction out of you. The changes ripple out into dozens of small, positive shifts. Someone else will quietly decide, "I don't have to live in that cycle of stress either." Walking away when you need to, refusing to fuel arguments, and showing care without overextending yourself are choices rooted in self-respect. Every time you repeat those choices, it gets easier and more natural. Even in the hardest moments, you're building a legacy of dignity, not because you're trying to be a hero, but because you're simply choosing the healthiest way to live for yourself. That choice sets a tone, a culture, and an expectation, whether it's at home, at work, or online. It can take a long time for results to show, especially in groups where old habits are deeply set. But the real value is that you never know who is watching, or who might need your way of handling things as a model to follow. Some people are desperate to see a different way, just waiting for an example that doesn't require yelling, manipulating, or endless debates. When they finally see someone navigate life with dignity and restraint, it shows them that change is possible. Your daily approach builds trust in all corners of your life. Bosses learn they can count on you to stay calm under pressure. Friends feel safe sharing vulnerable moments because they've seen you handle conflict without turning it into a contest. Family comes to respect your needs because they know you mean what you say. Even strangers online might cool down just because you didn't react to their worst comments with more hostility. By living with these quiet examples, choosing restraint, self-respect, and clear boundaries, you end up with relationships that are better, safer, and more rewarding. You have energy left over for what you want to build in your life, instead of spending it all managing other people's chaos. This gives you a kind of freedom that isn't easy to find, but is hard to lose once you have it. At the end of the day, the impact you have by modeling dignity and restraint goes further than you know. Maybe you'll inspire someone close to you, or maybe you'll change the everyday culture in your workplace or community just by being steady and fair. That's how lasting change often begins. Not with slogans or big speeches, but with ordinary people living in ways that make others feel safe, respected, and hopeful. That quiet example might be your biggest gift to the world, even if the people following it never admit that you led the way. There's a certain point when you've spent so much time living with calm, showing restraint, setting boundaries, and sticking to your values, that you look up one day and realize something feels different inside and around you. That difference might sneak up on you. Maybe it's a week after an argument that you didn't join, or it could take months or even years. Maybe you look back to last year, or even further, back to a time when your life was shaped entirely by other people's moods, expectations, or criticisms, and now things just feel lighter. The hard truth is, when you first disappear from chaos, or simply decide to disengage quietly, there's a real period of uncertainty. Sometimes that space, which is filled with silence and a different rhythm, can even feel a little bit scary. You question whether you made the right decision, and you might even worry that others think you are cold or selfish. It doesn't really matter if your withdrawal from negativity was received in the way you hoped. What actually happens is that, after the noise settles, you get an unexpected doorway to self-liberation. It's not about people chasing after you, regretting what they lost, or big gestures from anyone you left behind. The biggest, most important outcome is this ongoing experience of freedom, growth, and a fresh sense of agency that belongs only to you. All the energy that once went into explaining, defending, apologizing, or cleaning up messes finally becomes available for what you actually want and need. That's the moment you notice you are not chained to the old cycles anymore. At first, you might just notice little things. Maybe you sleep better. Maybe when you wake up, your first thoughts are about your own plans instead of who might be mad at you. You get up on a Saturday morning and choose what you want to do, not what you feel obligated to fix or finish for someone else. There is space in your days that used to be packed with drama, unnecessary conversations, and endless problems that weren't even yours to solve. Even physically, many people find they feel more rested, less stressed, and healthier, simply from ending old patterns and focusing on their own well-being. If anyone from the old chaos circles back, you notice it feels different. You don't feel that old compulsion to jump back in, fix things, or second-guess your choices. You might even realize that you hope they find their own version of peace too. Their issues are simply not yours to carry any longer. That's not cruelty or apathy. It's real freedom. It's understanding the line between caring and self-sacrifice. And for the first time, you're not willing to cross it just to avoid discomfort or be nice. There's usually an instinct to fill life up again. If your identity or day-to-day routine was always about keeping up with others, being the reliable one, the fixer, or just the person everyone vented to, then quiet can feel awkward at first. People sometimes try to fill gaps with new routines or activities because they are not used to a blank page. But if you give yourself a bit of time, it becomes very clear that this empty space is not a loss, it's an opening. Now, with more independence over your schedule, mood, and choices, you decide what actually gets a yes from you. The process of stepping into liberation is rarely dramatic. It can look as ordinary as reading a book uninterrupted, finally starting a hobby, or spending weekends with people who are kind, funny, or simply peaceful. You'll catch yourself laughing more easily or having real opinions on things because nobody's there to judge every word or look for hidden meanings. A lot of energy that was spent walking on eggshells is suddenly available for creativity, imagination, and even just rest. There's no denying that the discomfort from letting go can show up in waves, even after weeks or months. Your mind might wander back to old situations, especially if you're tired, lonely, or facing new stress. That's normal. Emotional habits, just like physical ones, fade slowly. Sometimes you'll have dreams about the past, or you'll find yourself wondering what people think of you now. But it's different. Instead of being pulled back in, you just note the memory and move forward. Each of these episodes is a sign of healing, and over time, the pull becomes weaker. With more time, your sense of freedom and self-worth deepens. You start to see yourself as the main character in your days. You notice what excites you, what motivates you, and what you simply tolerate. You realize your opinions still matter, even if no one else hears them. At some point, new opportunities pop up that you can actually embrace because you're not busy draining your energy into other people's expectations. Maybe you take on a new job, or you travel, or you revive old friendships that always felt natural. You might find yourself trying new things, joining a class, picking up a creative pursuit, setting ambitious goals, because you aren't afraid to take up space. Another mark of self-liberation is a smoother ability to handle setbacks or criticism. The same criticism that once haunted you for weeks or made you second-guess everything now feels smaller. If someone doesn't like you, it doesn't define your mood for the entire week. If you hit a wall at work or in a new relationship, you recover quicker and learn more from the experience. That resilience isn't just from reading self-help books or practicing positive thinking. It comes from all those days you spent protecting your boundaries, sitting in your own company, and realizing that your value is not up for negotiation. Your relationships, of course, start to reflect your new energy. Friends who took your kindness for granted either adjust to your boundaries or drift away. The people who stay are more likely to accept the new, more authentic version of you, one that laughs, disagrees, and is unafraid to say no. New friendships or partnerships can actually be lighter and more honest, without any baggage of keeping up appearances or swallowing your true feelings to keep the peace. Even family interactions can shift. They might push against your boundaries at first, but the more consistently you defend them, the easier it gets. Money, career, and health sometimes improve too, as a result of this personal liberation. It's not a magic cure, but being out of constant turmoil gives you bandwidth to plan for the future. You're better at managing stress, spotting real opportunities, or simply doing your job without distractions. The guilt trips and distractions from your old life fall away, and you find you have more time to build skills, meet deadlines, or move toward bigger dreams. Emotional habits built around self-sacrifice, people-pleasing, or taking responsibility for everyone else might try to worm their way back in during stressful times. But with each new cycle, you recognize those old routines more quickly and let go sooner. It's not about never helping others, but about being able to tell the difference between real support and self-sabotage. It's easier to say yes when you really mean it, and you don't punish yourself for saying no. When you reach this new beginning, this aftermath of stepping away from drama and embracing your own life, a sense of curiosity about the future often replaces old fears about the past. Instead of only looking back to check if someone is still upset or still thinking about you, your mind looks forward. You wonder what could happen next if you keep prioritizing peace, honesty, and simple daily joys. Where before your biggest hope was not to get dragged back into negativity, now your hope is for bigger things: new skills, adventures, connection, and growth. You'll probably also find yourself being more forgiving towards both others and yourself. You understand what it took to reach this stage, including your mistakes and all the times you tried to fix things that were simply unfixable. Instead of beating yourself up, you're able to see that every wrong turn was part of the lesson. You might even reach a point where you wish the best for the people you left behind, not with bitterness, but a quiet understanding that everyone is just trying to find peace or happiness for themselves, even if their actions make no sense to you. Real liberation can sometimes look like living a smaller or quieter life at first. Fewer arguments, less social drama, maybe less packed weekends. But over time, it adds up to something much bigger and much richer. You create space to connect with new people on your own terms, to step into unexpected opportunities, or just to enjoy days that are genuinely simple and satisfying. The best part is that you know now you're living from your own choices, not just reacting to the pressure of old roles, arguments, or imagined obligations. Some days are harder, obviously. Every journey has setbacks. Sometimes you're reminded what it was like to be in the thick of old patterns, and for a second, you doubt yourself. But you know what it feels like to be free now, and it's much harder to go back to old misery. You have proof from your own daily life that you don't need perfection from yourself or constant approval from others. The real success is simply moving through life with purpose and stability, comfortable with who you are and how you choose to shape your world. This new chapter isn't about being untouched by pain or pretending hard things don't matter. You'll still lose people, face disappointments, and sometimes grieve for situations that never improved. But now you know you can get through anything without abandoning your own well-being. Every time you choose rest over rumination, patience over panic, or laughter over worry, you're making your freedom stronger. You keep turning away from the old patterns, and that gets easier every year. You may even be surprised at how many people notice the difference. They may ask for your advice or quietly follow your example. Sometimes you'll notice people treating you with more respect or asking about your boundaries because your new approach makes them reflect on their own choices. Even if no one says a word, you'll know from the way your relationships feel. Life has shifted, and you are now the one steering it. This is real liberation. It's not flashy or headline news, but it's clear in the real ways you feel lighter, happier, and more hopeful. No matter the size of your social circle or the complexity of your old story, every day is a new beginning. You discover you're far less interested in the past and much more focused on what you're creating now, one decision at a time. And while those you left behind might spend ages trying to figure out why things changed or whether they should have acted differently, you're busy building a life that's about more than old grudges, silent feuds, or cycles of stress. Their unfinished business no longer shapes your day. Your quietest form of revenge is not revenge at all, but your ability to move on and thrive in peace. All the noise, all the chaos, and all the demands that once filled your hours, these become memories, not the law of your life. With time, your desire to return to drama fades, replaced by better habits, kinder relationships, and healthier ambitions. Each step in this direction is its own quiet victory. Liberation, at its core, is waking up each morning unchained from the past, ready for the first time to actually live the life that belongs to you.